So let's go to the concrete texture and we'll give it a speck, and we'll also give some texture to the rebar. So we'll go to the textures and let's choose some of these metals. So make a new folder for the rebar. And we'll go ahead and make our selection, but first you have to select the layer. And then we'll mask that folder out. So now let's drag these around and scale them down. So I will just quickly scale these around like so. And I kind of like that red color underneath it, so let's see if this blends with it. So hard light looks interesting, so let's use that. Also we have the rust, which we'll put on multiply, and this levels it, and we'll just sprinkle this around as well. Alright, this is pretty good. And this other one, I guess I don't really need it after all. So we'll hit save and make a new folder called specular, and we'll want to duplicate the ambient occlusion, and we'll also want to turn that off. So now we have this flat texture, and it should be okay to just select all, Control-Shift copy, go back to the spec, and then Control paste. Now in the spec, one thing I like to do is use adjustment layers on this and not affect it. Not only because it doesn't destroy it, but whenever we go back and change the diffuse later, we can just replace this and it should instantly update. So the first thing is usually I desaturate it considerably, because a lot of times specs just end up being a black and white, depending on if you can afford a colored spec. And I'll do a levels, and with the levels we really want to take these to an extreme and blow some of these settings out. But for the main concrete, we don't want it really that specular. So we're going to tone this down considerably, maybe something like that. For the metals, which would be the rebar and so on, you usually don't even want to use this much levels on there. So you can go back and get that selection with that and the rebar. And we'll go ahead and remove the mask on the levels and then add the selection. So now it's backwards, so we'll go ahead and hit Control-I to invert it. So now we'll give another levels. If you have a selection when you do the levels, it will inherit the selection as a mask, and we'll invert that one. So now we have the opposite. And now we will give this a little bit more brightness. Alright, and usually I still want to use the ambient occlusion, but not near as much. So actually I'll just leave it like that, and what I usually like to do is accentuate any metals. Metals are the thing that are going to be reflecting the light a lot more, so we want to add the new adjustment layer, the color dodge, like I mentioned before, and give some kind of light gray. And we're going to be painting in a lot of those highlights. So we can go small with the noise brush, just go in and accentuate some of these highlights. And likewise, I'll go in with the multiply and give a little bit more contrast for those metals. So I may go in and darken some of the cracks in here or there, especially over here. Just to make sure that metal really pops along the surface. It's almost like painting in a shadow or something around it. Alright, so this could be a first pass at our spec. So hit save and save as, choose target, and we'll name this concrete specular. And usually I don't make an action out of this one either because not as much iteration is needed for spec. So we'll just quickly add that spec into our material by dragging out another node, texture sample node, and just plugging it into the spec. And now you can see immediately that the spec really does pop off the surface more. But the concrete still has a little bit too much, especially right here. And we should re-import the rebar texture to see what that looks like. So let's hide the spec and then hit concrete diffuse and go back and make sure deferred compression is on and re-import it. And you can see it came in. And the rebar still needs work. And there's still some more stuff I would like to do to the diffuse here, so let's go back and tweak it some more. We're back in here with the spec and the diffuse. One thing I don't really like is that white spot, how that was being a little bit too bright. So we can go and locate that. There it is. And we could just try to mask it out really quick. I thought it would be interesting, but it ended up not. Alright, and concrete does look a little dark overall. And how am I going to fix that? Well, we can try adding another levels or a brightness contrast. And we can just increase the brightness, which helps a little. Go to like 10. Looks alright. And let's bring in this other concrete texture. And let's throw it into our scene. And let's see if this can help break some stuff up. And let's put it on. Let's go down and see what layer blends. And overlay looks pretty neat. It just breaks things up just a little bit. Levels it some. So I guess we'll just leave it at overlay and see if we can just splatter it right there. And we'll apply another mask. And let's try another brush. Been using this one for a while. And let's maybe try this one. And we'll paint away some of the excess details. Another thing we can try is just to paint solid color using our brush. We find a good brush. And we'll set this to maybe color dodge. And the cool thing about that is you can go back and forth, but it doesn't seem to be working quite right. I'm not sure what that brush is doing. So try another one. Go ahead and delete what's in there. And if some color dodge and it's painting a black, it should not be doing much. This brush is pretty interesting. Let's add another level and we'll let it do a multiply. Change this color dodge to maybe a screen linear dodge. I like color dodge because it preserves a lot of the colors. So if you make it solid black, it should essentially erase the color dodge. So you add and then erase. Also like to add a little bit of lightness where the concrete splits open. And to do that, I'll go ahead and add another layer. And I'll also make this, I'll make it overlay. I'll overlay some white in here over some of those areas. Just so I'm kind of just getting like a selection. Alright, go ahead and zoom out. And if I change this to like color dodge or whatever, you can see it's pretty bright. And I'll do a levels adjustment. And I'll colorize it. You'll notice I get that color. So I'll get some deep blues in there, desaturate it considerably, and bring the brightness back up. And this is just to experiment to see, how I can separate those two layers. But tone this down a little bit, and then go in. So you get the broad details, and then you have the smaller details. And it can be time consuming to add all the small details. But if we go back to our multiply layer, we'll see we can paint in a lot of small details, but that's obviously too black. We need to tone that down. Alright, so let's do the same thing, but to the metal. Let's do a multiply and a color dodge. And I'll just go and accentuate some of these. But I'm going to go ahead and drag these out of the metal layer because it's limiting my ability with that selection. Just give a little bit of depth. It looks a little bit like the metal texture is slightly blurry. So let's go back down to it and try an unsharp mask. That helps, I think. It's good to zoom out to see what you're doing. There's really any effect at all from a distance. The screen is good, but I still like the color dodge in some cases because it really does preserve the color underneath. Alright, so now let's save this. And with these new layers that we created, we want to integrate them into the spec. So we have this new color dodge layer. Let's duplicate it and drag it up into the spec. So let's maybe double it. Alright. And let's get a new version of the diffuse that we had created by hiding the ambient occlusion, selecting all, Control-Shift-Copy, and then going back down here to the base and pasting it. And you can see how it changed significantly. We may still want to tone it down just a little bit. Alright, so let's go ahead and save this. And let's see what it looks like. Alright, you can see how the rebar is starting to come in, and the fence looks pretty good in there. The rock still needs maybe a little bit more to break it up, but other than that, I think this is pretty good. The rock still looks a little specularly. What it looks like if we just tone that rock spec down a little bit more. Just go back in here to that bottom layer and just turn it globally down just a little bit. And we'll save it. And I think that helped. I still would like some sort of color and value breakup between this and this. Alright, so now one thing I'd like to do to just see what kind of surface detail we have is take the diffuse and turn off ambient occlusion. Select all, Control-Shift-Copy, go down to the normal, Control-Paste. Basically, I just need to get some surface details from this diffuse from the normal map. And to do that, I may just use I'll clone it once, but I'll just use the NVIDIA filter, and I'll use multiple layers and default settings like before. And those details are pretty small, and so we'll just filter, Gaussian blur it like a 2, and then run this on that. Now I'll go ahead and sharpen this, and we will overlay it, but don't forget to take out the blue. You'll see here is a good example what happens when you take out the blue. It really preserves a lot of that height information. So let's try it on this one too. This one's pretty noisy, and this one's a little better, but it's kind of blurry. So we'll try to sharpen it again, see if that helps. And it helps a little, but just need to tone that down. And then we'll bring in the real noisy one, and we'll just tone this one down as well. We just want that slight surface details. Let's see what that looks like. So now you can see how it really does break up that speck and add some nice details. It's not so smooth anymore. Especially helps it from a distance. Now it almost looks like it needs a little bit of that speck back. But we'll leave it off for now. And it's looking good. This just looks a little dark to me, and it just blends too much. So I'll try one more time to fix this and then move on.